Brady and Belichick have been at the forefront of the credit in New England for the last 20 years.
OTB's American Football Show, The Snap on OTB Sports Radio.
And you're very welcome along to the first edition of The Snap of the new season. All having a little bit of difficulty deciding what we're going to call the 2020-2021 season. 2021? But that's next year. Cian, Fahey, good morning to you. Good afternoon to you even. How are you?
I'm appreciating that back-to-school jumper you're wearing there, Ger.
Well,
it's fitting for our first day back.
This is not a back-to-school jumper. This is a piece of GA ephemera. This was the training top that my dad used in the 1970s to train the Antrim minor hurlers. So there you go.
Now you're trying to make me feel bad.
And also, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers colour. That's because we're doing the AFC today, aren't we? That's definitely what we're doing. Yeah, good. Okay, you've done your AFC research. Speaking of the AFC, it's time for the Ravens. It's time for Ronan Mullen. How are you, Ronan? This is your season.
All's well, Ger. I wonder, is this our season? I think last year was our season, but hopefully we can build off that momentum. The little problem of Patrick Mahomes is going to be around for a long time yet, so that should be a jewel to look forward to for the next few years, but hopefully the Ravens can edge it out this year.
Well, we'll talk about them when we do our preview, but you've got rid of that toxic presence of one of the best safeties of all time, which is definitely going to make your team better, as we've seen in the past. Losing good players is the fastest way to make your team.
I know Cian is Earl Thomas's #1 fan, and he was actually one of my favourite players for a long time. When he came into studio with yourself a few years ago, I was pretty awestruck, not going to lie, but having watched him game in, game out last year, he was not the player of yore. I don't know if it's because, we can get into all the off-field issues, probably we can save that for another day, but, even on the field, having played 3 deep for all his career and being exceptional in that role, the Ravens were a little bit more finesse in their game plan, and he did on coverages. So I think quietly the Ravens will be quite happy to have him off the books. Granted, it's a bit of a hit on the money side of things, but
they might win that case.
Yeah, true. But this is Lamar Jackson's team, and this is something that happens through generations where there's a shift in sort of leadership, and Earl Thomas being the Super Bowl winner that he is, serial Pro Bowler, it was pretty natural that younger players might look to him, but I think it was pretty clear towards the end of last season who the leader of that team was, and to have anyone sort of affecting that, I think it would be a little bit toxic for the Ravens. So I think it's probably best that he's out of the building.
All right, I want to get into this because obviously the off-season has been dominated by two stories. One is obviously how prepared or otherwise the NFL is going to be for the return of football, and we've seen that there's unlikely to be any college football before springtime, and then it's going to be a shortened spring season. We do expect that most of the games that are scheduled will go ahead as scheduled at the moment. On top of all that, there has been a far more important and deep-seated story, and that's the story of institutional racism in America that has finally become a topic of broad debate. It started with the murder of George Floyd, and immediately after the outpouring of disgust at that murder, we had Harry Edwards on the evening show speaking with Joe Malloy. He's obviously the godfather of the sociology of sport, was centrally involved in the Black Power salute in the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico. It's kind of his idea. He has mentored various athlete protesters in the generation since, and has been somebody who Colin Kaepernick would have spoken to a good bit. He was on after the initial Roger Goodell statement in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and he was not impressed with how the NFL were handling things then. Have a look.
Well, first of all, I read Roger's statement. I know Roger. We talk 2 or 3 times a month, and I know his heart. I know his fundamental sentiments, but he also works at the suffrage of the owners, who most of whom are very, very conservative, if not outright reactionary, and many of them are Trump supporters. And so when I read his statement, especially with the fact that Colin Kaepernick is still out there, Colin Kaepernick hangs over the NFL like a shroud. And when I read Roger's statement, it could not have any less credulity. It could not have any less veracity if it had been Dracula pledging to make a donation to the blood bank. Him talking about the NFL is going to stand up for justice, we're going to do our part and be responsible citizens and all the rest of that. As long as Colin Kaepernick is on the outside looking in, that kind of statement is laughable. And I'm quite certain that Roger realizes it, but as the commissioner, he had to make a statement. And it had to be a statement that essentially tried to put the NFL in a good light. It failed. It flopped. It was horrible. The other point is that it's part and parcel of the fact that they try to say that Colin Kaepernick is out of the league because he was an economic liability. There's nothing in the facts that validates that perspective. Nike made him their face of marketing in 2018, and their shoe sales and so forth increased by 32%. He had the most popular jersey in the country in 2016 and 2017. Most popular jersey in the NFL, even bigger than Tom Brady's. He has been one of the most popular figures in this country. So this notion that he's an economic liability is nonsense. It makes about as much sense as saying that we only have 2 African American and 1 black Latino coach in the NFL today out of 32 teams, because black head coaches, and in point of fact, black GMs, there are only 2 of them, are an economic liability. We don't have representative numbers of black head coaches and GMs because of an entrenched, reactionary, and in many instances outright racist disposition on the parts of NFL owners. At a minimum, they are blindly arrogant to the times that they live in and the realities that are reflected when you have 3 black coaches out of 32 with locker rooms that are 75% black.
Yeah, so that was a couple of weeks back, Harry Edwards speaking. He's been on again since, and I urge you to look them both up. They're both available in the podcast section on the OTB Sports app. The NFL have issued a statement on Jacob Blake. The NFL community is united more than ever to support one another in these challenging times. We share anger and frustration, most recently as a regular of the shooting of Jacob Blake. While our passions continue to run high, we are proud that our players and clubs, league and union are taking time to have the difficult conversations about these issues that affected the black community and other communities of colour in America. We're especially encouraged that these conversations are about how we can come together to make the necessary and long overdue changes in our country. And it continued, we will continue to not only use our collective platform to call out racism and injustice whenever and wherever it occurs in our country, but also fight together to eradicate it. Didn't go anywhere near as far as what the Baltimore Ravens did, so we can stick their statement up on screen now and have a read of this. This was their statement. And the point about this is it's not just expressing anger, it's actually suggesting some very tangible things to do. So, with yet another example of racial discrimination, with the shooting of Jacob Blake and the unlawful abuse of peaceful protesters, we must unify as a society. I'll skip through this one. This is bigger than sports. It's time to accept accountability and acknowledge the ramifications of slavery and racial injustice. So they're pinpointing that this is a historic thing. And the next one there, please, just stick on to the next one. Though we can't right all the wrongs in our country's history, we can arrest and charge the police officers responsible for Breonna Taylor's killing and the shooting of Jacob Blake, demand that Senator Mitch McConnell bring the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2020 to the Senate floor for vote. And then they go on again to suggest very specific things. And the last ones here are important. Prison sentencing reform that is fair and equitable, and encourage everyone to engage in the political process by registering to vote on both the local and national level. Since then, I think it's emerged that the NFL have said that all of their facilities, all training grounds, everything connected with any of the 32 clubs will be closed on polling day for November's election. So these are actually, there's a difference emerging here, and there's going to be a twin track, 2-tier or maybe multi-tier approach in how NFL teams deal with these issues. And what's going to happen is that the ones who are, as Harry Edwards said, at best blind to the issues and at worst institutionally racist, we're going to see those. And I think that's kind of quite a positive thing, that actually we don't know where what's happening in America is going to lead us, Cian, but we've certainly seen that the athletes are fully aware now of the power that they have, and who knows if there's going to be a game cancelled the next time there is an extrajudicial killing by an American police force of a person of colour.
Well, Harry Edwards that was incredible. I think I'll have to seek that out, because he pretty much said everything I would have said in a better way, I guess. That Baltimore Ravens statement, I actually wrote an article on Off the Ball about that when it came out. And the reason I did that is the Ravens called for something very specific, and Black Lives Matter has always been about something very specific. It's been about police brutality and police killing black people at an disproportionate rate. And the problem with the latest movement and the latest change in the overall narrative is it's become about combating racism everywhere. And why that's a problem is when you say to a racist, we need to stop racism, the racists go, yeah, we need to stop racists from other people. They don't go, oh yeah, I need to figure myself out. I need to make a specific change. Everyone sees racism as an ambiguous thing. They see acts of racism as an ambiguous thing. And us as white people tend to be very scared of being called racist or being very accused of being racist, which is a challenging thing for us, but it's not really a way to grow and a way to understand and a way to make changes. So when you have guys like the NFL owners, they're all entrenched in what they do. They're all entrenched in their beliefs. They're all Republicans. They're all basically all Trump supporters. They will donate lots and lots of money to Trump, but they will not actually make real changes for Black Lives Matter and combating actual racism, instances of racism and systemic racism. So we can't really look to the NFL owners. And actually one thing Edwards got very right there that most people forget or don't understand is Roger Goodell isn't really relevant to anything. He's a representation of the 32 owners. He does what the 32 owners direct him to do. So he's a reflection of the NFL as a whole. And the NFL, the NFL is a very powerful entity on its own, but the owners themselves are extremely powerful. And that's not just within sports, it's within politics, within the American society as a whole. And they can make real change if they want to. So if you look at the salary cap in the NFL there, that exists because Jerry Jones would just pay huge money to win a Super Bowl because he's desperate to win a Super Bowl if he was able to. If Jerry Jones actually cared about police brutality and police violence, he would not give huge money to the police and help the police, which is what defund the police is about. They're already massively overpaid. Small towns in America have tanks. Like, they don't need tanks. It's an army. It's not a police. It's not a police over there. So if they had, if they wanted real change, wanted to make real action, they wouldn't do all this stuff that's all symbolic and easy to do and now the popular thing to do. They would actually make change with political donations and stuff behind the scenes.
Well, look, we'll see what the players are able to force the owners to do. This is the beginning of stuff, and look, you just hope that it isn't the end of things and that actually they don't, and they're not able to get away with what they got away with the last time when it was like, let's kneel before the anthem and let's stand up during the anthem, which is what Jerry Jones did. Ronan, do you have anything you want to say on this before we start talking about some football?
No, I think Cian and Harry touched on all the key points, but like the key is for the whole thing not to be politicised, as everything seems to be. You've seen with the pandemic in America that it become a thing that has divided across party lines. And that's something that can't happen with this. I know Harry also touched on how college football, sort of the divisions of who's willing to come back to play and who's not, is also sort of geographically split, also with a political leaning. So you just hope that there's actually clarity of thinking and joined up thinking for any progressive movements here. And in terms of protests on the field, we know with the NBA last week, and because it's only a week ago, it's hard to kind of put it in any historical context, but it does feel like that's more than just a chapter in this broader story. That's probably a whole book in its own right, what happened in Orlando last week. And hopefully, given that Black Lives Matter is on the court and there is a little bit of symbolism about the whole thing with the names on the back of the jerseys, but really the NBA players knew and sort of gathered a consensus that it's beyond tokenism at this point. They need to make actual bold statements, and you wouldn't be surprised if similar things happen in the NFL this year.
Hopefully. Look,
there's one thing we kind of skipped past that he mentioned about the coaches. And that is a major, major thing in the NFL. It's also a problem in the NBA, where Steve Nash last night became the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, and Jason Kidd before him. There's a lot of what, like Steve Kerr has obviously has done a really good job with the Warriors, but there's a major problem in the NBA as well, where great black players aren't seen as the smart coaches, which is like the institutional aspect of football always was, where the quarterbacks, black players weren't allowed to be quarterbacks, so they weren't seen as smart. And now that's changing a little bit. So if you do want to point to some on-field or sports-related change, having guys like Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray at the top of the league right now is a major, major positive. And Dak Prescott, who is in one of the biggest positions in sports, is the Dallas Cowboys quarterback. Yeah.
And we obviously are going to talk about those quarterbacks now. So if anybody wants to talk to us about that, you can WhatsApp us. 087 180 180 is the number, or you can use the Twitter handle @OffTheBall, or leave a comment on whatever stream you're watching this live. Some of you get this on our podcast network as well, so make sure you hit subscribe on that. Let's talk about some football, and a reminder to everybody out there, the Snap and all of our American football coverage is brought to you by the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Like, every other sports event basically around the world. The 2020 game was postponed amid the global pandemic. 2021 now becomes the focus, and everybody's really hopeful that Illinois versus Nebraska can go ahead at the Aviva Stadium. Effectively, we need a vaccine for that to happen. The very latest up-to-date information about the game and tickets is available at collegefootballireland.com. Let's start with Patrick Mahomes. People will be tuning back into the NFL. They will no doubt be familiar with the outrageous figures and the representation of his contract as a $500 million contract that he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, to all intents and purposes, he is going to make $500 million over the next 10 years through on-field and off-field, and potentially $1 billion if he lives up to the potential of last year. Cian, it's impossible to see anything other than Lamar Jackson stopping Patrick Mahomes.
No, the football doesn't really work that way. The NFL doesn't work that way. Like we're glossing over, we repeatedly gloss over the fact that they weren't the favourites entering the playoffs for Super Bowl. The fact that they were losing in all 3 of their games, and they had to actually struggle to win that Super Bowl. Like the 49ers were an extremely good team, and they were at a peak that they're not going to reach again because they let DeForest Buckner go, or they're not going to reach again in the immediate future at least. They let DeForest Buckner go. They left Emmanuel Sanders leave. So they've replaced them well. They've brought in good young players, but they're a sign of what can happen in the NFL. You can have other teams that are just better in every single area, and the quarterback becomes the great equalizer. Peyton Manning won 2 Super Bowls, and in one of those he was a terrible quarterback. And at his peak during that first season back with the Broncos, he was exceptionally good, and they lost to the Seahawks because the Seahawks had a much better overall team. So it's going to be a challenge for the Chiefs to keep all their players moving forward. I know it's something that gets brushed aside a lot of the time, but these cap problems do exist. And then the other threat to Mahomes is he's already had one significant injury with that knee last year. So over the course of 10 years playing in the NFL, you tend to take a little bit of a beating. And his style of play, and so this is something that's kind of can tie back into what we were talking about in terms of quarterbacks and black quarterbacks and the way they're perceived. Mahomes' style of play is really dangerous. And that's not, whenever you say style of play for a quarterback and dangerous, people think, oh, he's a runner, he's going to run to hits. That's not what it is. The most dangerous style of play for a quarterback is a quarterback who's willing to stand in the pocket, play from condensed pockets, and stand in and take hits and let players fall at their knees all the time. And Mahomes, and that's how you become one of the best quarterbacks. That's how Ryan Tannehill hurt his ACL in Miami a couple of years ago. He stood in, Calais Campbell fell onto his knee in the pocket and snapped his knee in half, basically. And that's how you become one of the best quarterbacks, because you have to maximize all that time and space in the pocket and make plays work as designed. Every play is designed to work with the quarterback in the middle of the field. So if they can make that work, or if he plays that way for the next 10 years, he's not likely to stay fully healthy.
No. However, you would say that the expectation level, the bar should be set for Patrick Mahomes at Kansas City as high as we set the bar for Tom Brady, because he has the perfect coach. They've managed to keep the team together largely for next year, for this season, the 2020-2021 season, that we're all going to get so happy about saying. And Ronan, surely nothing is going to derail this team this year, barring injury.
No, the key point you made there is that they've largely kept their team intact, which is not the common thing for Super Bowl champions. So you would suggest that the ceiling is higher than they showed last year. They kind of stumbled a little bit mid-season. Granted, that was due in large part to that injury to Mahomes, which looked like a season ender at the time, and it was kind of somewhat miraculous that he made a run back. But I think they can actually build on what they did last year and improve a little bit. Damien Williams is a bit of a loss. I know because Mahomes wasn't exactly spectacular in that Super Bowl, he got the MVP, but Williams is probably their key player in that match to keep them sort of taking over and sort of finish the job ultimately for them. I know they drafted well and have a good replacement there, but you know there are a few issues they have to contend with. But the West is, while exciting, and I think all 3 teams besides the Chiefs have improved, I think they should win that division quite easily this year again, and it will be likely the Ravens or someone of that ilk meeting them later in the AFC.
Yeah, let's briefly talk about the Ravens, and we're kind of at the top end here. Did the Ravens get better or worse in the off-season, Cian?
Oh, up until that Earl Thomas release, it was very decidedly in one direction. So Ronan talked about this earlier, and what he said was right. Earl Thomas didn't have the impact they expected him to have. but it was also down to scheme and down to player assignment. So Don Martindale, Wink Martindale, which is his nickname, I don't really understand that, but Don Martindale is the defensive coordinator in Baltimore, and all he did last year was disguise coverages and blitz like crazy. And he did that because he didn't have individual quality pass rushers. This year, they've got Calais Campbell, and they got the Broncos defensive lineman, whose name escapes me right now, as two interior penetrators, and Campbell can move around and be a win one-on-one. So hopefully they won't blitz as much. But this is a huge key to their season. If they run the same defense this year that they ran last year, they'll run into the same problems. And with Earl Thomas, so the key detail of what it was is when you blitz, you're putting your secondary players in one-on-one situations and you're asking them to play in more space. When you disguise your coverages, you're asking your safeties to line up in one spot and then reach another spot before the play begins or as the play begins to cover more ground than they normally would. This means your safeties are going to be exposed a lot more. It means there's going to be a lot more big plays. The hope is the quarterback is confused enough that you can sack him, or he misses the big open play and throws the ball away or misses the throw. So it's a very high reward, high risk strategy, but it's also one that's the toughest for any safety to play in the league, because you can be as fast as Earl Thomas is and look slow because you're being asked to do so much more than you should be. And they improved this year by bringing in defensive players on the defensive line that will make them better. Campbell, in particular, is an exceptional player. The first-round rookie, Patrick Queen, I think is a good player as well. I think he fits what they're going to do there. They have massive size up front, so if they run into the Tennessee Titans again, it should be an easier matchup for them. The Chiefs, I think, are still built to beat the Ravens. So the big key for the Ravens taking a step forward this year are actually none of the additions or none of the rookies. It's Miles Boykin and Marquise Brown, the two second-year players. Those receivers, like Marquise Brown was outstanding as a rookie. Miles Boykin actually played very few snaps. I remember seeing him quite a bit because when he was on the field, he was involved. But he did not play a lot. So he needs to be the second starter there, and they need Marquise Brown to take that step forward into being a star. He's added weight, apparently, which he desperately needed to do because he was 160 pounds in a sport where everyone else is 210 or 205. So I'm excited about that team still. I think they're right there with the Chiefs, but I would probably favour the Chiefs a little bit, especially with the Earl Thomas departure.
Okay, is there an outright third team, or are we to think that if Cam Newton has been named the starting QB, that MVP quality Cam might be back, and in a Bill Belichick team that actually they should be right there? Like, what the hell's wrong with us riding off a Bill Belichick team? Sure, some players are missing. What about the Houston Texans? They're first up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they played pretty well for a quarter and a half to have a 3 or 4 touchdown lead, whatever it was, in the playoffs. In the was that the divisional game? Yeah. Are any of these teams close to the top two teams?
I mean, if you put Cam Newton fully healthy, fully effective with Bill Belichick, they're not just close, they're right there. So the story for the Patriots is they've lost a bunch of players to COVID opt-outs, and a bunch of starters are in there. So that's going to be a problem, and they're not going to be as good as they were in the past. But with Cam Newton and Bill Belichick, you've got the two most important pieces in the league, or the two most important pieces on your team. And a key detail of the Patriots is David Andrews is back in the centre. So they've now got the best interior offensive line in the league. The last time Cam Newton had a good interior offensive line, he was the MVP. So the quality of that team, if Newton is healthy, is right there with them. And I think it's a massive positive that Newton was already named a starter. He was named a captain, but that doesn't really matter because he's the starting quarterback and there's 3 captains on offense, 3 on defense. So he's always going to be one of them. But the fact he was named a starter a week before the season is a real positive, and I think that's a sign that he's fully healthy. So I'm high on the page. I picked every single game in the league, put it on Off the Ball last night, where I did all the predictions, all the records are there, and the Patriots, I think, had 12-4 in the end. So I believe in Belichick more than I do pretty much any other coach in the league, and I think if Cam's healthy, that's a major threat in the AFC. Yeah,
Ronan, there was like a 2-week post-season story where it was like, ooh, the Patriots could be about to throw it all in and tank because Trevor Lawrence is coming out and he's going to be the best quarterback of all time. It's going to be an off-season, they'll just regroup and they'll give the 2 Belichick kids time to see what it's like. And it's like, no, screw that, we're retooling, we're going, we're going to go. Are anybody else, like, is there that single tier, or do you agree with Cian that if he's fully fit and he plays, or even if he's not fully fit, if he's 70-80% of what he was, that there's enough there in Cam Newton and Bill Belichick that the Patriots can be relevant?
Yeah, it's incredibly fascinating. I think it's probably the most fascinating narrative going into this season is what the Patriots are going to look like. I know we'll talk with the NFC next week and the basically dream team that the Bucs are putting together for Tom Brady. It's incredible, but it's quite the opposite for Bill Belichick. They're stripped down. Cam Newton aside, there isn't that much star power, and as Cian mentioned, leaders off the team this year with Hightower and Chung. So I think it could be a little bit troublesome for them initially, but the playbook is wide open for Josh McDaniels, and I'm sure he's very excited about that. You just wonder about Cam Newton. It looks like a master plan from Belichick now, but he was off. Like, he was unemployed for about 3 months, Cam Newton. It's not as if Belichick always knew this was the guy that was going to take them forward. There's a lot to be said for driving the price down, and they did that to the nth degree. But like, anyone could have picked him up in the intervening couple of weeks there. So it's not as if Belichick knew he had him in safe hands.
No, but it's the same with the Ravens picking Lamar. Everybody could have picked Lamar, and it turns out they didn't even pick him first. So like, sometimes you get lucky when you're very clever.
Yeah, but you just wonder, is this like a shotgun wedding, or is this a marriage of convenience, or are they actually going to be together for the next 5 or 6 years? Is Cam Newton there to make a point? And he could. Like,
who's up the duff?
That's a fair point. No, I think if he is a reasonably good season, when he signed this contract, I'm sure it was a prove it deal, to use that term, where if you have a good season this year, it might not be with us, but you'll get big money in your next contract. And I think it's looking increasingly like, to your point, that the Trevor Lawrence, I think the Jags are making a play for him the way they're going in the off-season.
Seems to be.
But I think the Patriots are going to be with Cam Newton for the next couple of years. So it's more than a prove-it year for him. I think they're going to try and build something with Newton.
I was thinking about the AFC versus the NFC, and how all of a sudden the NFC have the Bucks and it's a bit sexier, and obviously. And then I was like, actually, hang on a second. There's loads of great stories in the AFC. We haven't talked about the Colts yet. We haven't talked about the Broncos yet. We haven't talked about the Steelers yet. If Big Ben is relatively fit, he is such an upgrade over the rubbish that they had at quarterback last year, Cian, that all of a sudden that team automatically becomes contenders, because their defence last year proved that the coaching staff are absolutely genius.
It's mad that you mentioned the big AFC storylines, and we haven't even mentioned that DeAndre Hopkins doesn't play for the Texans anymore, which was, for a long time, the biggest storyline of the offseason. But yeah, the Steelers, so I'm torn on this, because I think Mike Tomlin is a much better coach when he's not having an expansive offense, when he's not trying to win games with an offensive identity. And that means not embracing Ben Roethlisberger's desires to be this reckless timing, or not this non-timing quarterback, this guy who wants to come out and play the way he did in his prime, which he just can't do at 36, 35, 37, whatever age he is. Coming off major shoulder surgery where he couldn't throw for most of the last year, I can't be optimistic about how healthy he's going to be. But yes, if he's the guy he was when he was 30, when he was 29, this team is extremely good. You've got Juju Smith-Schuster. They've added Chase Claypool from Notre Dame, who is an interesting rookie to say the least, and they got him in the second round. The defensive front there with Bud Dupree, Cameron Haywood, and TJ Watt, who's becoming one of the better defenders in the league. You have the linebacker from last year where they brought in Devin Bush, and then you've got Minkah Fitzpatrick on the back end. The talent there on defense is exceptional, which will keep them at a certain level. Do I think they're going to be a contender if Roethlisberger is fully healthy? No, I think they'll probably be a playoff team, probably be in the wildcard round. And it's something we should mention as well. There's an extra wildcard round our team this year. There's 7 teams on each side of the playoffs. So I think I think the Steelers have exceptional talent on defense, have a good offense if Roethlisberger is fully effective. Like, the offensive line isn't what it was before either. That's taken a hit. Ramon Foster is gone as well. Marcus Gilbert left 2 years ago, and they haven't properly replaced him, in my opinion. So you still have question marks there, even outside of Roethlisberger. So the Steelers, like, defensively exceptional. Offensively, I'm not really excited about them.
The Indianapolis Colts have obviously taken a punt on an old QB who many people thought were washed. They have surrounded him with a lot of talent and a brilliant young core group of players over the last couple of years that they've been building. I mean, just imagine how good this team would be if they had Andrew Luck in their prime. Ronan, what do you think is going to happen with the Indianapolis Colts in the Phillip Rivers era?
Yeah, I think we touched on it in our shows a couple of months ago. I was just totally baffled by this move and the money they decided to pay him for the deal, given that there seemed to be no competition for his signature apart from the TV networks. I think ESPN were craving him to get into their booth, but they've gone a different direction because of what the Colts did here. But I understand the connection with Frank Reich. I think he's worked with him for 3 years in the past, so Reich obviously trusts him a lot. And as you mentioned there, they've got a lot of talent outside him, but he had a lot of talent with San Diego / Los Angeles as well. And I was always a big fan of Phillip Rivers, especially he reasonably okay the year previous, but last year it just looked like he got old overnight, and you just wonder, I think this might be a season too far for him.
I thought the same, but I've changed my mind. I think that modern medicine is great and can definitely help people have a late Indian summer, and also the fact that he's going to be behind one of the best offensive lines in football, Cian, is something that he hasn't had, and so therefore he's going to have a lot of time to make his decisions. Plus his receiving core is actually quite good. Has
modern medicine changed that much between this year and last year or the year before?
Well, his offensive line has.
Yeah, but like Philip Rivers hasn't been able to throw the ball properly for 2 or 3 years. Like he physically can't throw. He can't hit a 15-yard out route consistently, which is like he couldn't do it with Keenan Allen. He has a better offensive line. He doesn't have better receivers, and that's one of the big key with this Colts team is they drafted a guy in the second round who is basically a tight end who they want to play wide receiver, and Michael Pittman. And I just don't see enough talent on the Colts to be excited about them, even if they had good quarterback play. I don't think there's a massive difference between what Philip Rivers is right now and what Jacoby Brissett is right now. If I was looking for a team in the AFC to be excited about and who are going to be like an upstart and who are going to upset at the top, which typically happens in the NFL, we generally get at least one team in each side that becomes a bigger team than you expect. I think it would be the Denver Broncos because they've got that youth. Drew Lock last year had an awful first game, and then after that was exceptional for the rest of the way through. They've changed their offensive coordinator, but they've brought in Pat Shurmur, who's pretty smart, who's pretty good. You've got the wide receivers there, Jerry Jeudy's adding to Cortland Sutton, which is exceptionally good. The offensive line there is coached by Mike Munchak, which is a massive upgrade. Well, he was there last year, but he got his real positive is he, like Dante Scarnecchia in New England, the more time he has an offensive lineman, the better they're going to get. So hopefully he can sort Garrett Balls out. And then defensively is Von Miller, and you've added AJ Bowie, and they've added from the defensive lineman Gerald Casey from the Tennessee Titans. So if I was picking a team like outside of the top AFC teams, I would be looking past the Colts. I don't even think they'll compete with the Texans in their division. So I think, or the Titans in their division, who are a better team than them as well. It's the Broncos for me who are kind of the next team in line there.
All right, are we writing the Titans off? You have been on the Ryan Tannehill bandwagon before. It was popular or profitable to do so. Are you clambering off it now that everybody else is on board?
It definitely wasn't profitable for me to be on that bandwagon anyway. I think that team overachieved last year. I think the coaching there is problematic in that it narrows the windows. And what happened last year was Tannehill made everything work and was exceptional, playing at an exceptional high level.
Hang on, is the coaching not good? What's wrong with the coaching? Because everybody raves about Mike Vrabel.
Hold on a second. Everyone raves about coaching in the NFL based on win-loss records. That's why everyone thought Matt Nagy was a really good coach after his first year when he was doing a lot of problematic things in situational football. And one of Matt Nagy's biggest problems now is he doesn't use Mitch Trubisky the way he should. So my problem with the Titans offense is they purposely take away space. So the designs of the routes are to put A.J. Brown into tight areas, and they have another receiver coming into the same area. And it's all done off of play action. It's all done with very specific run-oriented offenses. And that can work when you've got Kyle Shanahan calling plays, because Kyle Shanahan maximizes space. When you have Deebo Samuel running across the field and Emmanuel Sanders running deep on a post route, the defense is being pulled in two different directions, which creates those wide open windows for Jimmy Garoppolo to hit. The opposite is happening in Tennessee. And it happened all last year. And if you go through Ryan Tannehill's plays, you see every single time he's hitting a deep ball, well, most of the time he's hitting a deep ball or an intermediate pass, it's going into this minuscule window. And it's a testament to how good Tannehill was and how accurate Tannehill is and how talented his arm is that he can make those throws consistently. But if you're asked to, like the way I always explain this is, if you're asked to do a second-class test and you're asked to do the leaving cert every single day, the person who's doing the leaving cert is always going to become worse over the long term because they're being asked to do something much tougher than what the second-class person is being asked to do. So it's a level, like coaching, you should be making your players' jobs easier. You shouldn't be making things tougher, and you shouldn't be so rigid and so specific in what you're asked to do. Marcus Mariota made those types of offense. He was a different offensive coordinator, different head coach as well, but a similar philosophy and similar style. He made those offenses work for a long time, and eventually it wore him down, and he took 8 or 9 sacks at one point and couldn't move the ball and could barely throw the ball by the end. And the same thing happened to Ryan Tannehill in Miami. So it's not something that he's unfamiliar with either. If you don't have good coaching, it will eventually catch up to you. It might not impact you in the short term, but over the long term, it will.
Okay, so you think the Titans are coming back to earth this year?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And they also giving away Gerald Casey made no sense to me.
He's a run stopper, is he? What does he do?
No, Gerald Casey, he had 1 or 2 down years, but it was relative to where he was before. He was one of the best defensive linemen in the league for a long time. He's a penetrating defensive lineman on the interior, which is extremely difficult to find. And they drafted a guy 2 years ago who's going to be really good as well, and he's his replacement. But when they drafted him, the idea was he'd put him next to them, and you could elevate your whole offense or your whole defensive line. He's similar to Aaron Donald, but obviously not on Aaron Donald's level. But he's just one stop below that. And if you put him now on the Broncos next to Von Miller, together, and that's a big part of why the Broncos are taking a big step forward, and they've got Bradley Chubb as well. So
yeah,
it was insane to me.
Chubb's injury, there was swelling in the knee last week, so I think people are concerned about that. And obviously he's such a superstar player as well. Who do you think is coming back to earth, Ronan? Because obviously every year one of these teams ends up being sometimes it's through injury. The quarterback goes down and they don't have a plan for that because you just really can't legislate for it unless you have incredible planning or you're Belichick. So any of these other teams, or are you on board with the Titans being the one that comes back to the pack, Ronan?
No, I quite liked the Titans last year, and I take all of Cian's points there, but the momentum they had at the end of last season, I know we dismiss momentum as a real thing in sports, Ger, but I think they did something of a feel-good factor out of last season. I think they will carry that on. Mike Vrabel seems like a kind of character who can channel that positive energy, and they kept most of their team. I think 10 of their offense from last year are back to start this year. So even Derrick Henry, I think even Mossy Quinn at our roadshow was quite sceptical about whether he'd hang around, but you have to play the hot hand when you have him, and the franchise tagged him and kept him on the books. So it's unlikely, obviously, that he'll be pass rush champion again. 2 years on the spin, it almost never happens. But I think if he can have any 80% of that impact, they should have something of a run this year. And then, like, for the first time, there's actually interest in all the divisions. You can even say about the East, given that Tom Brady's not there anymore, that there are some interesting, even the Dolphins, who I think Brian Flores deserved enormous credit last year for an organisation that was clearly trying to lose, and he still managed to win games with them. And the Bills, who, again, close strong. Again, it's hard to look past the Patriots, but even that division seems to be a lot more competitive than it used to be.
Yeah, here's hoping. Here is absolutely hoping that it is a bit more competitive and that we see the Patriots involved in some close games on a regular basis. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other end of things, but before we do, what's the story with the Houston Texans?
Is that just an open-ended question?
Well, it is, because they have...
I mean, I can go in different directions here.
Well, they have one of the best quarterbacks in the league who's electrifying to watch. I own him in a dynasty league, and so therefore I've been tuned in pretty much every week to what he's been doing. And it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Constantly running for his life, constantly pulling stuff off, sometimes left-handed, sometimes I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see him pass the ball to himself at some point in all this. And
I think the best way to explain this, Jared, is that Dwayne Brown 2 years ago got traded away, one of the best left tackles in the league. Last year, Jadeveon Clowney got traded away. Now, Jadeveon Clowney isn't with a team right now, so you can argue he's probably not that good, but he is extremely talented and was effective at the time. And then DeAndre Hopkins got traded away this year. So there's a very clear pattern where Bill O'Brien is mismanaging his players and mismanaging what is decision-making. And a couple of years ago, Bill O'Brien didn't like the first-round pick of the Texans, so he assumed the GM role. He got his GM fired and took over and became the head coach and the GM. And we talked about this before, but being the head coach and being the GM is a real problem because the GM is supposed to be there as an objective guy who sits back and evaluates players away from the training field, whereas Bill O'Brien has made emotional decisions over and over again. And he's cut players because they've had bad practices or weren't. It was Donta Foreman who was criticised for not being fully 100% in the practice, and he just cut him. So Bill O'Brien has this belief in himself that he is a superstar head coach and he can make whatever players he has work and become this great team. And it's really hurt them because they've just been hemorrhaging talent. And in Bill O'Brien's defence, they've had one bad season since he's been in his 6 seasons there. They've won at least 9 games every single year outside of that year Deshaun Watson was hurt. But they're just never going to take the next step. And when you're really if you look at last year's playoffs, the real problem here, because there have been coaches in the league who will jettison talent and still make it work. But the real problem with Bill O'Brien is they got to the key moment last year against the Chiefs. They needed to make that aggressive move. They were up 21-3 or whatever it was. They were up by 3 scores. They could have pushed out to an insurmountable comeback for the Chiefs, and he kicked a field goal. And instead of kicking a field goal, or instead of going for it when it was 4th and 1 near the goal line, he kicked a field goal and then came back on the next drive and faked a punt or faked a field goal, whatever it was, and and gave the ball back to the Chiefs again. Yeah. So if you're combining, you think you're more important than the players, and then you making really bad decisions on the field, it's going to cost you in the long run. So
they are one of those teams who you expect to fall back to earth, or because they have such good quality at quarterback, are they actually still going to be one of those teams who ends up in the playoffs?
Well, I think Deshaun's going to carry them the way he did last year. Like, they were only a wildcard team last year. They went to the second round of the playoffs by beating the Buffalo Bills, who were awful. So I don't think they're coming back to earth. I think they'll be around the same level because they did bring in Brandon Cooks, who's a really good addition. Like, as much as he's not DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to be effective and he's a good fit with Deshaun Watson because he's a really aggressive decision maker, wants to throw deep. They'll be throwing deep bombs all year. There'll be a lot of fun to watch an offense, but they won't be consistently good. They won't be as good as the 49ers, the Chiefs, or the Ravens.
You don't think David Johnson is going to have a breakout comeback year?
David Johnson, like, his body is broken down. Like, David Johnson in his early years was this incredible athlete who could run over you, could run around you, could jump over you, could make you miss in tight spaces. He could do everything. And then he had all these lower body injuries. And he just became stuck in the mud, and he was always kind of carrying himself rather than exploding in through runs. And it really made no sense that the Texans took that contract back in the Hopkins deal. Like, it seems they sought him out. They wanted him, which was baffling to everyone watching on, because he's not even as good as Duke Johnson, who's already on the roster.
We'll see. All right. Do you want to say anything about them before we move on to the Cleveland Browns, Ronan?
No, I think the key point is that it's not really feasible given the stress of both O'Brien a little bit, and that trade in the summer, or that trade in the offseason, made no sense at the time, and you kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he had a grand plan and he was going to spend that Hopkins money on something more to build a team in other areas. But then he ended up giving the same money to Brandon Cooks, who, you know, has been problematic, really, like a very talented player, but has never really lit it up in recent years, especially. And then Randall Cobb again. It's like, if you're just paid DeAndre Hopkins, I know there's personality clashes, but nobody since Hopkins came into the league, nobody has started more games than him at the wide receiver position. So I think that kind of speaks to his reliability.
Yeah.
To get rid of him, your franchise player, I just couldn't get my head around it. But the Browns, I don't know, like the fact that they actually have a coach this year should benefit them. You know, someone who's capable of head coaching in the league should improve them a little bit. And, you know, it's a very talented team, and a lot of people were picking them last year, given their recruits in free agency coming into last season, that they could challenge for the North. Obviously never played out like that, but they're probably better built to be underdogs, especially this season when it is such a competitive AFC North. And then the Bengals look like, I know Joe Burrow is the face of this draft class, but, you know, coming into your first competitive game off the back of no preseason snaps, you know, it's quite a daunting prospect for him.
The Browns, Cian, there's just a little bang of the 49ers last offseason to them. When I'm reading what people are saying about them, it's a year on from the hype. The one difference is that we actually did see a lot of their quarterback play this year, whereas the previous season, obviously, Garoppolo had been injured and their quarterback play was absolutely useless. So maybe I'm wrong to draw some parallels, but I think the 8.5 win total, I'm going over on that.
Ooh, I'm definitely going under. No, but I understand where you're coming from. Like, isn't it mad? We haven't even, like, Myles Garrett isn't even a big story. Like, he was throwing helmets at people not that long ago, and we went in and kind of looked at and were wondering if it was going to be assault or not. But the Browns have kind of had an offseason that they really, like, I guess my reason I'm down on the Browns is I'm so down on Baker Mayfield and I'm so down on them where they're coming from last year. But in terms of their offseason, you can't really criticize them. Jedrick Willis coming in at tackle is perfect at left tackle. He's an outstanding player, and he's going to be a great starter from day one. And then Jack Conklin at right tackle is a proven starter at right, who played for the Titans last year. So that addresses their biggest non-quarterback issue. You've got two high-quality starting linemen on the outsides, which is the exact opposite of what they had last year. And you have Kevin Stefanski coming in, who, like, Stefanski is Gary Kubiak disciple, basically. Gary Kubiak came into Minnesota last year, and Stefanski ran the offense that Kubiak ran while Kubiak was the assistant. But really, it kind of felt like Kubiak was the offensive coordinator there. And what that means is it'll be a lot of running the ball. It'll be a lot of the quarterback under center, a lot of hiding Baker Mayfield and not asking Baker Mayfield to do things that he can't do.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a Nick Chubb-heavy offense. So in that sense, in terms of the 49ers comparison, that's going to look very similar because it's going to be a lot of running the ball, a lot of open play-action shots. And the other thing is, Odell Beckham mentioned this kind of in passing a couple of weeks ago. He played hurt last year. So, like, when Odell Beckham is fully healthy and fully effective, that's a complete offense-altering addition. So, if he's fully healthy, Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs in the league. Austin Hooper comes in as a good fit as tight end. Jarvis Landry is still there. I don't like Jarvis Landry, but people generally do, and he generally produces if given enough opportunities. So I think like the talent is there. My big questions with the Browns is just the quarterback.
Yeah, well, look, if they're hiding him, who knows? And if they've got the brain power to do that properly, then fair play to them. They're going to be able to do it. Tim Gaming on YouTube says, certainly going to be a weird season, but I think Mahomes will dominate again. Oddly, I'm not sure the Ravens will be quite as good. I don't know. I can't see any reason why there would be significant regression in terms of what the Ravens are able to do. They've beefed up their running attack, so they might not ask Lamar Miller to run for 1,200 yards. But I don't know who's going to be able to stop him. Like, watching the best defenders in the NFL last year get juked out by him in no space on wet days was like, wow, this is absolutely phenomenal. He's by far the most exciting and electric runner to watch. And then he's also one of the best quarterbacks at the same time. It's a sensational thing to look forward to. Let me run you through the fixtures, because this day next week we will be looking back on the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, who are up in a rematch against the Houston Texans. The Buffalo Bills are at home against the Jets on Sunday afternoon. It's the Vikings at home for the Packers. The Washington football team at home for the Philadelphia Eagles. The Ravens have the Browns first up. The Jags have the Colts. It's going to be interesting to see exactly just how bad the Jags are this year. The Panthers, an interesting test case for how quickly you can rebuild a franchise, even when you've got an absolute superstar in your team, at home for the Raiders. And it's Detroit at home against the Bears. They're the first 8 games, and second 8 games for you. The Falcons at home to the Seahawks. The Pats at home for the Dolphins. The Bengals and Joe Burrow at home for the Chargers. The 49ers are playing against the Arizona Cardinals. The Denver Broncos against the Titans. The Giants against the Steelers. And the Rams against the Cowboys. And the Saints are playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I didn't realise that... is it the Giants and the Steelers? I didn't realise there were interconference games in the first week of the season, but obviously there are. Do you want to say anything about Joe Burrow and how exciting that actually is going to be for one of the most begotten fan bases in world sport?
Over the length of the season, yes, absolutely. He's going to be great to watch. The first game, I think he's unfortunate because he has more hype than any quarterback since Andrew Luck, and he didn't get any preseason games. He didn't get any real preparation. And now he goes in and has to face Joey Bosa, being blocked by the Bengals offensive line, which is one of the worst in the league. Like, he's being thrown in like at the deep end that he could possibly be thrown into. So I actually feel really bad for him because the first couple of weeks are going to be extremely rough. He might actually, he might perform through it. And if he does that, then the hype is going to go insane because the start should be bad. I think overall he's going to have a really good rookie year, but he's going to make a lot of mistakes. They're going to ask him to do a lot, which is standard for high-end rookies. Yeah,
that's the last question I just wanted to ask you both. Is it going to be a weird year because of the absence of preseason games? We hear coaches bitch and whine and moan and piss about preseason games, and now this year they're bitching and whining and moaning and pissing about the fact they don't have them. Does it matter?
To that point, I think it is more for the rookies that just have to acclimatise to this whole new pace and strength of basically match day action that they just will not be familiar with whatsoever. And it will take a couple of weeks, the weeks where they would have played quarters and halves in pre-season to get used to that. They just won't have it this year. So Burrow very much thrown in the deep end. He seems to have the correct temperament. I've never been totally won over by his actual talent, to be honest. I'll probably be proven wholly wrong on that over the next few years, but I think he's definitely level-headed and he won't be bowled over by the occasion or anything like that. And he seems to have won over the building in Cincinnati anyway. The way Mixon is talking and AJ Green, they seem to be, this is our guy now going forward, which they weren't necessarily saying about Andy Dalton. But everyone was saying that about Baker Mayfield as well, that he's a leader. He's a leader of men and all this kind of stuff, and the Browns never really kicked into gear. So I think the jury's still a little bit out on Joe.
Yeah, Baker didn't actually look like a leader. He just looked like somebody who liked to take the piss out of the coaches during Hard Knocks. So we'll see if Baker can make the comeback that everybody thinks he can. A reminder, of course, the Snap and all our American football coverage is brought to you by the Aer Lingus College Football Classic. Check out collegefootballireland.com for all the details about the game that we really hope goes ahead. Illinois against Nebraska. We were all very sad last week, which should have been the day when the college football game between Navy and Notre Dame was happening this year, but obviously events, dear boy, events, and we didn't get to see it. So anyway, I want to just pull this up. It is Cian's piece on otbsports.com. It's a deep dive ahead of the season where he's gone into looking to see exactly what is going to happen in every single game. So, you know, did you put down an accumulator on this? For your 1 cent, do you win like $1 billion?
I haven't done that yet. I always wait till the last minute to do that because you might get a situation like an Army Tunsil trade that happened last year, and the Ravens were -4.5, I think, over the Dolphins, a team that wasn't trying to win, and that was covered basically at halftime. I will look at in this article, I picked every game, but like picking every game, especially with the way the sport is with injuries, you can't really have much confidence in that. But there's a specific overs and unders there that I'm really confident in, that I really like. So you can go to that article and find them there. Also, just because we haven't mentioned him at all, we should mention Tua Tagovailoa is fully healthy apparently and is ready to start the season, which is a big deal for the Dolphins fans.
But don't play him yet, right? Give him 5, 6, 8 weeks to actually get up to speed and see exactly what's happening, be in the environment, and then unleash him. There's no rush, right? If he's your guy and he's fit, there's no rush. This season, not that important. Next season, not that important. Season after that, yeah, let's go, right?
You and I can say that, and that's historically what the league has been. But ever since the Jags came in and said Blake Bortles is going to sit for his whole first season, it doesn't matter what happened, and Blake Bortles was starting in week 2, it's been like that. No one's had any patience. Actually, the only team that's had patience is the Kansas City Chiefs, and look how that turned out. So you can't really complain. You can't really criticize that approach. But NFL coaches are under so much pressure now. The turnover was so quickly. They're always in a rush to get the rookies on the field. I think Tagovailoa will be starting by week 3.
Cian, good stuff. Ronan, good stuff. Thanks a million. And we'll see you next week for a review of the first game of the NFL season. I can't believe it. Best of luck.
Cheers, lads.
OTB's The Snap.